There's a particular kind of power that doesn't come from money or title or even fear. It comes from being the only option. In the neighborhood surrounding the Tema industrial area in Ghana, most families were one bad month away from real trouble. Not tight budget trouble. Real trouble. Kids pulled from school, rent unpaid, electricity cut, food portions getting smaller and smaller until there was nothing left to cut. The kind of trouble that quietly destroys a family from the inside. So when people in that neighborhood talked about the garment factory on the edge of the area, they didn't talk about it the way people talk about a job. They talked about it the way you talk about a lifeline. Yes, the machines were old and dangerous. Yes, management ignored injuries. Yes, the pay was low, but it was steady. It was there. And in a neighborhood where the other options were street hawking, farm work, or nothing at all, steady, and there was everything. The factory employed hundreds of people from the surrounding area, and all of those hundreds of people eventually had to deal with one man. His name was Victor. He had been transferred to Line 7 as the new shift supervisor. Fresh to the neighborhood, didn't know anyone, nobody knew him. But it didn't take long for people to figure out exactly who he was. Not because he announced himself, but because of what he controlled. Victor decided who got the extra hours. Extra hours meant extra pay, and extra pay was the difference between making rent and not making rent. He decided who got placed on the safer machines, because some machines in that factory would chew your hand up if you lost focus for even a second, and some wouldn't. He decided who got promoted, who got the favorable morning shifts instead of the brutal overnight ones, and who simply stayed in his good grace, which meant nobody bothered you, nobody gave you a hard time, and your job felt a little more secure than everyone else's. In other words, Victor didn't just run Line 7. In a neighborhood this poor with options this scarce, he basically ran the lives of everyone who worked there. The men knew it. They came to him with their heads slightly bowed, careful with their words, quick to offer help, slow to say no. If Victor needed something done, the men did it without being asked twice. Because the ones who didn't, the ones who pushed back or acted too proud, found themselves on the worst machines, on the worst shifts, with the fewest hours. And everybody watched that happen. Everybody learned. But with the women, Victor was different. Not kind exactly, but softer, more patient, more willing to listen. If a woman came to his office with a problem, he leaned back in his chair and heard her out. He nodded. He made her feel like he was genuinely considering her situation. He had not yet figured out why he did this. He just did it. And so, not long after he arrived, a pattern began forming on its own. Women came to his office. Men stayed out of his way and made themselves useful. Victor sat at the center of it all, comfortable, in control, the quiet king of a very small kingdom. He had no idea how much bigger that kingdom was about to get. Her name was Grace. She worked the morning shift on Line 7 and had been at the factory for 3 years. She was not begging for a job. She already had one. She was not begging for promotion or more money. She just needed her hours changed. The reason was simple. Her mother had gotten sick, and the only time she could take her to the clinic was in the morning. The morning shift made that impossible. If she could just be moved to the afternoon shift, even temporarily, she could manage both. Keep the job, take care of her mother. That was all she needed. So one Tuesday, she knocked on Victor's office door. He told her to come in. She sat down across from him and explained her situation carefully, respectfully. He listened with his hands folded on the desk, his face unreadable. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Now, the truth was, Victor had already decided he was going to help her. It was a small request. It made sense. There was no real reason to say no. But here was the problem. If word got out that all you had to do was walk into his office and ask nicely, and he'd give you whatever you wanted, his door would never close. Everyone on Line 7 would be in that chair within a week, each one with a perfectly reasonable story. He would lose control of the whole thing. So he decided to let her sit with the uncertainty for a while. Not because he was cruel, just to make it clear, without saying it directly, that this was not easy, that he was doing her a favor, that she should feel grateful. He leaned back and said he wasn't sure. The schedule was complicated. He would have to think about it. Grace nodded and said she understood. Then she said she really needed this. Her mother was not well, and she had no one else to help her. He said he understood, but these things take time. She leaned forward slightly and said she would really appreciate anything he could do, that she would do anything to make this work. He nodded slowly, half listening, already thinking about how much longer to drag this out. She said it again. Anything. He looked up. Something in the way she said it the second time was different. He studied her face. She held his gaze and didn't look away. His mind moved slowly at first, then all at once. He had heard that word, anything, 100 times from people in desperate situations, and it had never meant more than it sounded like. But right now, in this small office, with the door closed and the noise of the factory floor humming outside, he suddenly understood that she was not using it the way people usually did. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked her carefully what exactly she meant by that. She told him, directly, no more hinting. She said if that was what it took, whether it was oral or sex, she was willing. She just needed those hours changed. Victor sat very still. He had not expected this, not even close. And for a few seconds, he genuinely didn't know what to do with it. This woman was not asking for her job back. She was not desperate for a promotion that would change her whole life. She was asking for schedule change, a small thing in the grand scheme of things, and she was offering her body for it. That told him something, not about her. He understood, even then, that she was just trying to survive. It told him something about the job, about what it meant to people in this neighborhood, about how much weight even the smallest favor carried when you had nothing. He agreed. He changed her hours that same week. And for the next month, Grace came back to that office regularly. She had no problem with it. This was the deal. She needed the hours, he had the hours, and this was the currency they had agreed on without ever really agreeing on anything. At the end of that month, he told her that if she wanted to keep the arrangement, she was welcome to come back. She came back, and sitting in that office on the day she returned, Victor felt something settle inside him. A quiet realization, slow and certain, like a key turning in a lock. He looked around the factory floor through his office window. Hundreds of people, all of them needing something, all of them willing to do almost anything to get it. And he was the one they all had to come to. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he smiled. It didn't take long before it stopped feeling like something that had happened by accident. Within a few months, Victor had turned what started with Grace into something structured, not written down anywhere, not spoken out loud as a formal arrangement, but understood, the way certain things in certain places are always understood without anyone saying them directly. The deal was simple. You come to him with what you need. He listens. If he decides to help you, you come back to that office, and you give him what he wants. And as long as the arrangement continues, he continues to take care of you. Better hours. Safer machine. A little extra on your pay. Nobody breathing down your neck on the floor. You stay in his grace, and his grace keeps your family afloat. That was it. No contract. No proof. Just the two of you in a small office with the door closed and the factory humming outside. The women came one after another. A mother of 3 who needed overtime to cover school fees. A young woman trying to save enough to move her family out of a single room. A woman whose husband had lost his job and whose income was now the only thing standing between her children and hunger. They each came with their own story, their own specific need, their own version of the same desperation. And one by one, they made the same calculation. What he was asking for was awful. They knew that, but what they were getting in return was real, tangible. It showed up in their pay slip at the end of the month. It showed up in their children eating dinner. It showed up in the lights staying on. So they came, and they kept coming. What surprised Victor, if he was being honest with himself, was how quickly the women on line 7 figured out what was happening. He had expected secrecy. He had expected each woman to guard the arrangement carefully, terrified someone would find out. But that wasn't what happened. The women talked. Not loudly, not openly, but in the way women in tight communities talk, in low voices, in passing in the spaces between things. They knew about each other. Most of them, anyway. And still they came. Because the alternative was worse. That was the part that people who had never been that poor sometimes struggled to understand. It wasn't that these women didn't know what was happening to them was wrong. They knew. It wasn't that they had no dignity or didn't value themselves. They had plenty of both. It was simply that dignity doesn't feed children. Pride doesn't pay rent. And when those are the stakes, real, immediate, no safety net, the calculation changes completely. Most of them never spoke about it directly, not even each other. There was an unspoken agreement among them too, a second agreement running parallel to the one with Victor. We don't talk about this. We don't make it loud. We survive and we move on. The men on the floor had their own version of the arrangement. Victor never asked them for anything sexual. What he asked for instead was simpler and in some ways more degrading. He asked them to help him. If he had his eye on a woman who hadn't come to him yet, he would tell one of the men to talk to her. Put in a good word. Let her know Victor was reasonable, that he took care of people who took care of him. The men did it. Not all of them gladly, but they did it. Because the ones who refused found themselves suffering in the quiet, invisible ways Victor was so good at. A bad machine here, a docked hour there, just enough discomfort to make them understand. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. Months turned to years. Victor ran line 7 like his own small country. He was not a complicated man at his core. He liked control, he liked comfort, and he liked knowing that everyone around him needed him more than he needed them. This arrangement gave him all three. He went home most nights feeling satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with the sex itself. It was the power. The fact that he could walk onto that factory floor any morning and every single person there was either in his debt or working to get into his favor. He was not rich. He was not famous. He was a shift supervisor in a garment factory in a low-income neighborhood. But in that neighborhood, in that factory, he was a king. And then one of the women got pregnant. Her name was Linda. She had been part of the arrangement for about 8 months. She was quiet, reliable, never caused problems. She had a boyfriend at home, a good man who worked irregular construction jobs and loved her genuinely. They had been together for years. They had plans, not big dramatic plans, just the ordinary kind, a place of their own someday, maybe children when things were more stable. When Linda realized she was pregnant, her first feeling was not panic. It was actually a small, cautious happiness. She and her boyfriend had talked about children. The timing wasn't perfect, but it was not a disaster either. She went home that evening and told him. He went very quiet. He already knew about Victor. Not every detail, but enough. In a neighborhood this small, in a factory this central to everyone's lives, these things moved through the air like weather. He had told himself he could live with it, that it was survival, that he loved her and understood the world they were living in. He had convinced himself he had made peace with it. But baby was different. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he told her he couldn't do it. He couldn't accept a child that might not be his. He was sorry, but he couldn't. Linda didn't argue. She understood, even through the pain of it. She sat with that for a day. Then she went to Victor's office. She told him calmly. She was pregnant. She believed the child was his. She was not there to make a scene or threaten him. She just needed him to know, and she needed to know what he was going to do about it. Victor listened without changing his expression. When she finished, he leaned forward and told her she needed to get rid of it. He would pay for everything. It would be clean and quiet and done. He said it the way you tell someone to fix a leaking pipe. Linda shook her head. She told him she couldn't do that. It was against everything she believed. She was not going to abort this baby. She wasn't asking him to marry her or upend his life. But he was going to have to take responsibility for this child. That was not negotiable. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. That was the only sign. He tried again, softer this time. He reminded her that the other women who had found themselves in this situation had handled it quietly. This was not something he could have out in the open. Surely she understood that. He would cover all her costs. She would go back to her normal life, and nothing would change. Linda said the answer was still no. He tried a third time. Harder now, less soft. He told her she was being unreasonable, that she was going to create problems for herself that she didn't need, that he had been good to her, and this was how she was choosing to repay that. She stood up, looked at him directly, and said she was having the baby. If he wanted to be involved, fine. If not, she would manage. But she was not getting rid of it. Then she walked out. For 3 weeks after that, nothing happened. Victor didn't call her in, didn't change her hours or her placement, treated her exactly as before on the floor. Linda began to wonder if maybe he had accepted it. Maybe he had decided to let it go. Then one evening, he called her. His voice on the phone was completely different from the last time they had spoken in his office. Calm, almost warm. He said he had been thinking about everything, and she was right. He had handled it badly. He wanted to talk properly, like adults, and work out what responsibility was going to look like going forward. He asked if she would come to his house so they could speak privately without the factory around them. Linda felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she had wanted. Not a fight, just acknowledgement. Just someone saying, yes, this is real, and I'm going to do right by it. She went. His house was small and neat. He welcomed her in, and they sat down and talked. He asked about the pregnancy, how she was feeling, what the clinic had said. He was attentive in a way he had never been at work. At some point, he got up and brought her a glass of water and set it in front of her. She drank it. They talked for another hour about what the arrangement might look like, money for the child, hospital costs, what she would tell people. By the time she left, she felt steadier than she had in weeks. Like something had shifted, like maybe this was going to be okay. She went home and went to bed. A few hours later, she woke up with pain in her stomach. At first, she told herself it was normal. Pregnancy came with discomfort. She turned over and tried to sleep, but the pain got worse. Then she started bleeding. It went on through the night. By morning, she was pale and weak and barely able to stand. Her neighbor helped her to the clinic. The doctor examined her and came back with a look on his face she didn't understand at first. He told her she had miscarried. Then he told her that based on what he was seeing, this had not happened naturally. Something had induced it. Linda lay on that clinic bed and stared at the ceiling. She went back through the previous day, slowly, carefully, like someone checking every room in a house for something missing. She had not taken anything, had not gone anywhere unusual, had not done anything that could have caused this, except the water. She had drunk the water he gave her. That was the only thing. That single glass in his neat little house, while he asked her warm questions about hospital costs and what she would tell people. She lay there for a long time. Then she got up, signed herself out of the clinic, and went to find Victor. She didn't shout when she got to his office. She had thought she would. But when she sat down across from him and looked at his face, completely composed, completely unbothered, the anger went somewhere deeper than shouting. She asked him directly, "The water, what was in it?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her the truth. Just like that. No hesitation, no guilt on his face, nothing. He said she knew what the arrangement was. She came to him. He gave her what she needed. She gave him what he wanted. That was the deal. A baby was never part of it. The other women understood that. When something like this happened, you dealt with it quietly. She had refused to do that, so he had handled it. He said it the way you'd explain a policy. Linda sat across from him and felt something she had never quite felt before in her life. Not just anger, not just grief. Something that sat below both of those things, heavier and quieter. The feeling of realizing that to this man, in this office, she had never been a person. She had been a transaction. And when the transaction produced an outcome he didn't agree to, he had simply corrected it. Like fixing an error in a spreadsheet. She wanted to hit him. She thought about it. Her hands were shaking. Instead, she stood up, pushed in her chair, and walked out his office. She already knew what she was going to do. The headquarters of the company was not far. But for someone in Linda's position, walking through that door felt like crossing a border into a country that might not recognize her. She was a factory floor worker from a low-income neighborhood. The people behind those desks wore shirts with collars and spoke in careful, measured voices. She had no lawyer, no documentation, no proof of anything except what her body had been through and what her own memory held. She went anyway. She sat across from an HR officer and told him everything. Not just a glass of water. Everything. The office. The closed door. The deal. The hours and the overtime and the promotions and the price attached to all of it. She told him how long it had been going on. She told him how many women were involved. She told him about the men Victor used to approach women on his behalf. She told him about the pregnancy and what Victor had done to end it. She spoke for a long time. The officer across from her wrote things down and asked occasional questions in a neutral tone that gave away nothing. When she finished, he told her they would look into it. He thanked her for coming in. She went home and waited. The investigators arrived at the factory 2 weeks later. They were quiet about it at first, pulled people aside one by one. Small rooms, closed doors, careful questions. Nobody knew exactly who had said what or who had been spoken to. The floor buzzed with a low, anxious energy that everyone felt and nobody named directly. And then the denial started. Woman after woman sat across from the investigators and shook her head. Said she didn't know what they were talking about. Said Linda was lying. Said she was bitter, a woman scorned, inventing stories to hurt a man who had rejected her. They said it with straight faces and steady voices. Some of them said it looking directly at the investigators without blinking. The investigators wrote it all down. What the investigators didn't fully see, what they couldn't see from their side of the table, was what was happening on the other side of it. These women were not lying because they supported Victor. Most of them despised him. They were lying because they still needed the job. They were lying because an investigation meant attention, and attention meant exposure, and exposure meant their husbands, their boyfriends, their families, their neighbors finding out exactly how they had been keeping the lights on. They were lying because the truth cost more than they could afford to pay. Survival had brought them to Victor's office in the first place. Survival was keeping them quiet now. But not everyone stayed quiet. Several of the men came forward. Some of them had been fired by Victor over the months, small acts of resistance that had cost them their place on line 7. They had nothing left to protect. They talked. They gave names, dates, specific details that lined up with what Linda had said. One of them had kept a message Victor had sent him instructing him to speak to a particular woman on the floor. Another remembered being told directly what was expected of him in exchange for keeping his position. It was enough. The company moved quickly after that. Victor was called in, questioned, and dismissed within days. No dramatic scene on the factory floor. No announcement. He was simply there one morning and gone by afternoon. His office door stayed closed for a week, and then a new name appeared on it. The new supervisor was a man named Mr. Andrews. Mr. Andrews was not a bad man. He was actually quite decent by most measures. He showed up on time, treated people evenly, didn't play favorites, didn't take anything from anyone. He ran line 7 by the book. The actual book, the official one, the one management had written and nobody under Victor had paid much attention to in years, which meant the book applied to everyone equally. Fixed hours, no unofficial overtime. Placements decided by seniority and performance, not by private arrangements. Promotions went through proper channels that took months and required paperwork and approvals from people above Mr. Andrews' level. There was no back door, no office where you could go and make something happen quickly, no grace to be in. What you got was what the contract said you got, not more, not less. For some people on line 7, this was a relief. They came to work, did their jobs, and went home without the low hum of obligation that had lived under everything before. They breathed a little easier, felt a little more like people and a little less like pieces in someone else's game. But for others, it was a different story entirely. The women who had been in Victor's arrangement had built their lives around what that arrangement provided. The extra hours had become part of their monthly budget. The favorable placements had protected them from injuries that would have cost them weeks of pay. The overtime had covered school fees, rent, hospital bills, the 100 small emergencies that life in that neighborhood produced constantly. All of that was gone now. Mr. Andrews couldn't give them more hours than the schedule allowed. He couldn't move them to better machines without justification. He couldn't do anything for anyone that he wasn't doing for everyone. He was fair, completely, inflexibly fair. And fair, it turned out, was not enough. Within weeks, the effects were quiet but visible to anyone paying attention. Women leaving work with a tightness around their eyes that hadn't been there before. Children being kept home from school on days when the fees came due. Rent conversations happening in hushed voices. The small daily negotiations of poverty that Victor's arrangement had, in its twisted way, softened for a while, now back in full force with nothing to cushion them. Some of the women on line 7 were angry at Linda in a way they couldn't fully explain even to themselves. They didn't think what Victor had done was right. Most of them had never thought that. But right and necessary are not always the same thing. And what Linda had done, walking into that headquarters, sitting down, telling everything, had removed the one tool they had for making an impossible situation slightly more bearable. They didn't say this out loud, not directly, but Linda felt it, in the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room, in the way eyes moved away from hers on the factory floor, in the way certain women who had once greeted her warmly now found reasons to be somewhere else. She had told the truth. She had done what anyone looking in from the outside would say was obviously the right thing. She had reported a man who had drugged her, ended her pregnancy without her consent, and exploited dozens of women for years. And some of those women hated her for it. Linda never went back to the factory. Not because they fired her. They didn't. As far as headquarters was concerned, she was the whistleblower. Letting her go immediately after investigation like that would have looked exactly like what it was. So her job was technically still there, her name still on the schedule, her place on line 7 still hers if she wanted it. She didn't want it. She had walked those floors for years. She knew every sound a machines made, every crack in the concrete, every face on every shift. It had been, in a way that hard places sometimes become, a kind of home, but you cannot unknow certain things. And she now knew exactly what those floors had cost her. Not just the arrangement, not just Victor, but what she had lost in that clinic bed on an ordinary morning, staring at a ceiling that had nothing to tell her. She left and found other work. Harder work, less pay, longer commute. She managed. Victor did not go to prison. This is the part of the story that sits uncomfortably, because it should probably be said plainly rather than buried or softened. The company fired him. The investigation confirmed what Linda had reported. But confirming something internally and proving it in a courtroom are two entirely different things. The women who had denied everything during the investigation were not going to change their stories in front of a judge. The evidence the men had provided was enough to cost Victor his job, but not enough, his lawyers argued, to prove criminal conduct beyond doubt. The glass of water, the substance he had used, the induced miscarriage. Linda had no physical evidence. She had her body, her memory, and his cold admission in that office, which he now denied ever making. The case was reviewed and quietly dropped. Victor moved to another part of the city, found work eventually, some said in a similar supervisory role somewhere else. Whether he carried what he had done into that new place, whether the same patterns followed him there, nobody on line 7 ever found out. Or if they found out, they didn't say. Years passed. The factory kept running. Line 7 kept producing. New workers came, older ones left, the machines broke down and got partially repaired and broke down again. Mr. Andrews ran the floor decently and without drama and was neither loved nor hated, which is probably the most honest thing you can say about a fair man in an unfair system. Some of the women who had been part of Victor's arrangement moved on and built better lives. Some stayed stuck in the same tight corners poverty builds around people. Some found ways to talk about what had happened to them eventually, quietly, to people they trusted. Some never mentioned it again to anyone. The woman who had started it all, Grace, the first one, the one who had walked into his office about a schedule change and changed everything without knowing it, transferred to a different factory 2 years after Victor left. She never spoke publicly about any of it. She had children eventually. She was okay. But the question that Linda's story leaves behind doesn't go away just because the story ended. It sits there, quietly, and it is not a simple question, which is exactly why it stays. When Victor was running line 7, those women were surviving. Barely, and at enormous cost, and in a way that was wrong from every angle you look at it from. But surviving. Their children were eating. Their rent was paid. The lights were on. The arrangement was exploitation dressed up as transaction. Abuse dressed up as agreement. None of that is in dispute. But when Linda told the truth and the arrangement ended, those same children ate less. Those same lights flickered and sometimes went out. The suffering didn't disappear when the exploitation did. It just changed shape. So here is the question, and it deserves to be asked honestly without a clean answer waiting on the other side of it. If you're a woman on line 7 and you have 3 children at home and rent due on Friday and no other options, not real ones, not ones that pay what this job pays, And the only way to keep everything together is to walk into that office and close the door behind you. Is the woman who walks in wrong? Is she weak? Is she complicit in her own exploitation? Or is she just doing what people do when the walls close in, finding the one crack of light available and pressing herself through it, whatever shape that crack takes? And if you are Linda, if you're the one who finally said enough, who paid the highest price anyone in that factory paid, who lost something that can never be given back, and you walk into headquarters and tell the truth, and the truth makes things harder for the very women you stood up for, what does that mean? Were you right? Of course you were right. But does being right fix anything? The factory didn't change. The neighborhood didn't change. The poverty that made Victor powerful in the first place didn't change. A new supervisor came and ran a fair floor, and the machine kept running exactly as it had before, producing the same garments for the same low wages in the same dangerous conditions, sending the same thin pay slips home to the same struggling families. The only thing that changed was that one man was gone, and the space he left behind was not filled with justice. It was just empty,